What's up, guys? We have another game against Noble Hammer. He's rated 1544 and he opens up with 1d4. We just bring the knight out. He brings the knight out. Normal development. I'm gonna go c5 and attack the center just to see how white responds. It's a weird move. Oftentimes white doesn't know what this is and they get confused because it looks weird because it's just a hanging pawn. But see, the c5 pawn is used sacrificially in tons of openings. So he pushes past in Benoni style, I suppose. And now he's on my side of the board. So I'm going to go e6, which attacks the pawn twice and opens up my bishop. So now he's on my side, and basically I say, "You've gone too far, sir. Stay on your side." He says, "Well, you know what? I'm going to stay on your side. I'm going to protect my stuff, and there's nothing you can do about it." Well, I beg to differ. This c4 pawn, I'm going to attack it with b5, Benko Gambit style. If he takes, he undefends the central pawn, and I will take his central pawn. If he tries to defend it, he could, but his dark squares are getting weaker and weaker. So instead he defends it with the bishop, which is a try. So I feel like we have options. We could fianchetto and continue our development. That looks very good, actually. So let's do that. Develop our bishop, add a third attacker to this. It might be hard for him to defend third time, so he has to release the tension by taking. That's fine. What's the drawback? It undefends the central square. Before I would have taken with the pawn, but now that our bishop's here, I'm thinking maybe take with the piece, but I still think the pawn maybe. Help control e4. I'll probably can get rid of this pawn at some point. Otherwise, it's just a strong pawn. He attacks it twice, but it's going to be hard to attack further until his rooks are developed. So now I could try to develop quickly. I can't get my knight in the game. I could just develop my bishop and castle. That's logical enough. But there's also a6, which is interesting. But let's just get castled first. No funny business with our king in the center. It's unnecessary. We'll get castled, and our pawn center looks way more imposing than his, because his is non-existent basically. We're closer to castling than him. He's not even up a pawn, which I don't mind sacking a pawn for so much development. I want to play a6 and okay, so he brings this here ready to castle. Now I'm going to play a6 because if he takes, and let's say, well, you could take with the bishop, but saying, oh, if you take, you wasted a tempo, but you don't have to. If he takes here, maybe you could take with the knight. I'm not sure. So he castles. Now if you take, maybe you help develop one of his pieces. So I'm going to leave that there, and I'm going to castle. I'm just going to leave the tension. Eventually he won't be able to cope, and he'll take. He moves the bishop again, which is weird because he put it on e2 to begin with. Maybe he's trying to bait me into this, which is a bad move. But okay, we can continue developing. We want to get this knight out, which means we have to address the pawn. Now that we're castled, we don't really care if he gets piece here because it's not doing anything. And when we develop our queen, it's going to pressure that piece. So now he brings in the knight, but what does it threaten? I mean, nothing really. So we could bring our queen in, but I think maybe we just bring our knight in. and stop any knight jumps from him, develop our last minor piece. We can always bring the queen in after. He develops a rook to play this. That's fair. It'll undouble our pawns. I don't mind it so much. Also, I'm going queen b6, which pressures the knight, which means his bishop is resigned to defense duty, so it can never participate in stuff like this because the knight will be hanging. Also, I have c4 cutting the connection with tempo, so c4 is a threat. Normally you would never play c4 because it ruins the protection of the center, so when you play it, his knight hops in here, you have backward double d pawns, which is terrible. But if it wins a piece, that's different, because there's priorities in chess, starting with checkmate, going down, and doubled pawns or backward pawns are at the bottom of the list of priorities. So he goes a4 to defend it with a pawn. This frees up his bishop, but his rook's undefended. Currently we can't use that, but keep it in mind. Does this knight jump do anything? It hits his bishop, but does it do anything else? Can we get a 2-for-1 deal here? I'm not seeing the 2-for-1. So, okay, we want to improve this bishop then. F6 square looks nice. So let's try to make some room and go in the middle. I mean, if I go here and he takes, I take, it hits the knight. So he doesn't have time for this per se. So let's go for it. Because if it undoubles our pawns and we get to play d5, that would be bad for him. Otherwise, we make room for our bishop to go to a much better square. And then we can put a rook maybe on e8. Maybe bishop a6. Depending. Maybe knight b4. We'll see what white does. I wouldn't want to be white here. I'd much prefer black. I mean, look at the center. Very overwhelming. He develops his bishop, but not so effective. Doesn't really do anything here. The downside is, also I can take it if I want, get the bishop pair. Also it cuts off the defense of the bishop, so that's a little weird. Maybe he wants to put it here to contest my diagonal. That makes sense, but there's so much stuff hanging for him. I feel like at some point it has to collapse. So let's follow with our plan. Control this nice diagonal. So we have some decent pieces. I think white has more misplaced pieces. I don't think this knight's actually good. It actually can jump here, so like takes. He still has to address the knight, so he never has time for anything he wants to do. And you always give away the bishop pair if you do this, so you better have something concrete. At the moment, I'm threatening this pawn, but am I really? If he goes over, will I even take it? Probably not. But he defends it this way, which is super ugly. Really ugly move. Also, there's potential this stuff in the future. So, like, if I take this piece, however he recaptures, well, he has to recapture with the queen. So he might blunder that. And then once I go here, he moves his rook somewhere. And then if I take the bishop, he'll just take back with the queen. I mean, then I could pin the knight and maybe win a pawn, but I don't like that. Let's just leave his rook here because it's dumb. And let's just develop. Let's just... This would release control over this square. Does that matter? Not sure. It releases control over the knight. That definitely matters. So let's just move our rook in. Develop a piece. I mean, what's white gonna do? They don't really have many moves. I could take the bishops basically whenever I want. But this knight is strong here, so there's no need to. At some point, I'll have to, like, if he goes here, threatening the trade. Maybe I'll take then. I'm looking for an opportunity to kick this and then do something, but it never works. Again, this knight, no big deal. As long as you're watching for the forks and whatever. Taking the bishop and jumping the knight has to be an idea at some point. If he takes with the knight, his bishop would hang, so takes. Okay, so he takes the knight, so I don't have any of those ideas. I recapture with the pawn. It comes with a tempo instead of taking with the rook. It also undoubles our pawns so that we can get in d5 with a strong pawn center. Of course, these pawns you need to protect them, but if you can, then white has no space. And if you can't, you'll lose them. But you could probably fight it off. So now that my knight's gone from the board, he's allowed to jump his knight in here, which hits a bunch of stuff. We don't want to lose the rook, obviously, and our bishop's defended. So we're just going to attack the knight. If we go somewhere else, like here, he can take our pawn. Here, he can only take the bishop, which I'm fine with, because it's, you know, there's a bunch of stuff in the way anyway at this point. Now he has two knights hanging. If he takes this knight, I can maybe take this knight, but probably I don't want to. So he leaves both knights hanging like a boss. Attacks my queen. Is this pawn not hanging? No. Can I not take it? Oh, I see. He wants to take this. And then when I take, he can take the piece. But then he loses the piece at the end. So it's still not good for him. But I could just move my queen also. And then take this pawn like later after the line's over. Because it's a weak pawn. And b4 doesn't help him. So instead of getting into complications, I'll take that pawn later. For now, I'm just going to say, do something with your knights. So what? You kind of have to take this, right? That way you at least get a piece. And now I'm going to take this because it's a replacement light square bishop. And it forces his knight to go where exactly? Completely trapped. Wow, trap knight, amazing. So he goes queen here. What does this threaten? Well, it really threatens the c pawn, but but there's that. All right, so we get a good game. Hopefully you can follow my train of thought. Let me know if you like the way I'm doing the thought process, if it makes sense to you. Submit your rapid games in my Discord so I can review them for you. Good luck.